The bitter tang of recycled air and lukewarm synth coffee was Zael Ryker's constant companion. From his cramped workstation overlooking the grimy, bustling transit hub of Terminus Station, a notorious haven for those who preferred the galaxy's shadows, he watched ships tear free of gravity's embrace, their drives flaring like fleeting promises. Each departure was a fresh stab of an old wound. He hadn't piloted anything more complex than a cargo hauler in 15 years, not since the Starlight Beacon. The name itself was a cruel irony now. A beacon extinguished, its light forever swallowed by a disaster of his own making. Zael ran a hand through thinning, gray-streaked hair. 15 years of self-imposed exile on this rock at the edge of the Orion Spur frontier, and the ghosts of the Valerians lost aboard that research outpost still whispered to him in the hum of the station's overworked life support. The Valerians, with their crystalline skin that shimmered with internal light, their society built on harmonic resonance, their meticulous precision, they wouldn't have forgotten. Their collective memory was as perfect and unforgiving as their logic. A newsfeed flickered on a public screen across the concourse, the usual cacophony of market prices and political squabbles momentarily silenced by an urgent bulletin. An anchor, with worry lines etched deep into her Tellarite features, spoke of a new anomaly, spreading from the Typhon Void, the Chrono-Static Cascade. Early reports were fragmented, chaotic, ships arriving days late with crews aged by decades, or worse, found drifting, their systems and inhabitants frozen mid-action, like grotesque three-dimensional photographs. Some spoke of localized temporal fields so distorted that a dropped tool might shatter from accelerated decay before it hit the deck. Zael leaned closer, the synth coffee forgotten. The anchor detailed the Galactic Concorde's initial, fumbling, responses, shield modulations, attempts to navigate around the spreading phenomenon. All ineffective. Then the feed cut to a Valerian representative, their voice usually a melodious chime, now strained and brittle. The Valerians, whose advanced technology relied heavily on precisely tuned temporal mechanics, were being hit hardest. Their ships were particularly vulnerable, their systems desynchronizing into catastrophic failure. A cold dread, familiar and sickening, settled in Zael's stomach. The descriptions of the CSC, the erratic distortions, the temporal shearing, the way it seemed to unhitch objects and people from the normal flow of time. It wasn't identical to what had happened with his temporal anchor prototype, but the underlying symphony of disaster played a chillingly similar tune. His anchor was meant to stabilize ships in volatile spacetime, a way to iron out the wrinkles. Instead, in that unauthorized, rushed test, it had gathered them, amplified them, and torn the Starlight Beacon out of phase. Temporally shattered, the official Valerian inquest had concluded, a polite term for obliteration via temporal mechanics. He'd pored over the fragmented data from that day 1,000 times in the lonely years since, seeking an error, a miscalculation, anything but the horrifying truth that his ambition had outstripped his understanding. He'd found patterns, dangerous resonances he hadn't foreseen. And in those agonizing reappraisals, a horrifying, then fascinating new theory had begun to form. A theory too monstrous to share, born from the ashes of his greatest shame. The urge to speak, to warn someone, was a physical pressure in his chest. But who would listen to Zael Ryker, the butcher of Starlight Beacon? He could imagine the Valerian's reaction, cold dismissal, perhaps even arrest. The rest of the Concord likely held him in similar contempt. His name was a byword for catastrophic failure, for human recklessness. Yet, as reports of the CSC's relentless advance continued to filter through the station's comms net over the following days, each more alarming than the last, Zael found himself sketching equations on flimsy synth pads, his old fire rekindling amidst the embers of guilt. The cascade wasn't just a destructive force, it had a structure, a rhythm, however chaotic. And if it had a rhythm, perhaps it could be countered. He pulled up the specs of his old temporal anchor, the diagrams seared into his memory. The principles he'd misused, the energies he'd unleashed, could they, if inverted, controlled with the wisdom of hindsight he now possessed, become not a weapon of accidental destruction, but a shield? A tool to restore harmony, not shatter it. The idea was audacious, born of desperation and the unique, terrible insight his failure had granted him. He was a pariah, a ghost haunting the fringes of the galaxy. But as the Chrono-Static Cascade threatened to unravel the fabric of spacetime across the Orion Spur, Zael Ryker began to wonder if the ghost of Starlight Beacon might hold the only key to survival. The Valerians, for all their brilliance, were likely looking for a solution within the bounds of their established science, their harmonic resonance. This threat, Zael suspected, played by no rules they understood. But he, Zael, had already broken those rules once before with devastating consequences. Perhaps it was time to break them again, this time with purpose. His comlink, usually silent save for docking fee reminders or automated system updates, suddenly chirped with an unfamiliar, encrypted incoming signal. Zael stared at it, a knot tightening in his gut. It was a Valerian frequency. They had found him. The time for hiding, it seemed, was over. The Valerian shuttle descended through Terminus Station's murky atmosphere with a grace that seemed out of place amidst the utilitarian ugliness of the orbital dock. Its crystalline hull, even coated with the grime of interstellar travel, caught the station's harsh lights, scattering them into fleeting rainbow shards. Zael watched its approach on his monitor, the encrypted signal having resolved into a curt, undeniable summons. There would be no running. He met them in a disused cargo bay, the air thick with the metallic tang of rust and disuse. Two Valerian guards, their forms tall and slender, flanked a central figure. Their crystalline skin, normally a vibrant, light-infused blue, seemed muted, almost dull, reflecting the grim reality of their situation. They moved with a liquid precision, their sidearms, sleek, energy-based carbines, held at a subtle, but unambiguous low ready. The central Valerian stepped forward. Zael recognized her instantly, despite the years. Praxis Viridian. Her crystalline structure was a deeper amethyst than most Valerians, her features sharp, intelligent, and currently set in an expression of profound distaste. 15 years ago, as a junior investigator, she had been part of the team that sifted through the wreckage of Zael's career and the echoes of the Starlight Beacon. Her official report had been scathing, a precise and logical vivisection of his recklessness. He remembered the cold fire in her eyes as she delivered her findings. It was still there. Zael Ryker, Praxis Viridian stated, her voice a low, resonant chime that nevertheless carried an edge of frost. It wasn't a question. You have become difficult to locate. I wasn't aware I was sought after, Zael replied, his voice carefully neutral. His heart hammered against his ribs, a frantic drum against the backdrop of his weary resignation. Circumstances have shifted, Praxis said, the slight hesitation betraying the unpalatable nature of her mission. The Valerian High Command has authorized the exploration of all potential avenues regarding the Chrono-Static Cascade, even those previously discredited. Zael felt a bitter smile touch his lips. Discredited. That's a polite way of putting it. The Starlight Beacon incident cost 78 Valerian lives and a state-of-the-art research facility, Praxis countered, her voice hardening. There is no polite way to describe such a failure. I live with that every day, investigator, Zael said, his gaze unwavering. Or is it High Praetor now? Your ascent has been notable. A flicker of something unreadable crossed Praxis's features. My current designation is not relevant. What is relevant is a data fragment salvaged from your former laboratory on Cygnus X1, notes pertaining to uncontrolled temporal shearing, theories that at the time were dismissed as dangerously unstable. She paused, the silence heavy. Theories that bear a disturbing resemblance to the mechanics of the CSC. So, that was it. They hadn't just found him. They'd found his mad scribblings, the theoretical extrapolations he'd made in the aftermath, the seeds of his current wild hypothesis. The cascade is consuming Valerian systems, Praxis continued, her tone clipped. Our fleets are being neutralized. Valerius Prime itself is threatened. Our conventional temporal science offers no counter. Her eyes, like chips of amethyst ice, bored into him. Explain your theories, Ryker. Now. Zael took a slow breath. This was it. The moment he'd morbidly fantasized about and simultaneously dreaded for years. He owed them this much, at least. The starlight beacon, my temporal anchor. It wasn't designed to destroy. It was meant to create a small, stable pocket of spacetime. I pushed it too hard on an unstable prototype, without sufficient safeguards. He swallowed, the memory still raw. It created a cascade failure, a localized temporal shearing effect. The station was torn apart, its components scattered across disparate time flows. We are aware of your catastrophic incompetence. One of the guards, designated by the soft hum of his translator as Unit Gamma 7, intoned. Praxis silenced him with a sharp glance. The cascade, Zael pressed on, ignoring the interruption. It operates on a similar principle, but on a vastly larger scale. It's not just shearing, it's creating desynchronized temporal pockets that propagate. But where my device created focused chaos, the CSC is more like a wave front of that chaos. He hesitated, then plunged ahead. I believe that the same principles, the very mechanism of my failure, if precisely controlled, refined, and inverted, could be used to counteract it. Praxis's expression remained impassive, but a subtle tightening around her eyes betrayed her skepticism. Inverted? You propose to fight fire with fire, to use the source of a past disaster to avert a current one? Not fire with fire, Zael corrected. More like constructive interference. Or rather, destructive interference targeted at the cascade's propagation waves. A precisely tuned counter-resonance. If the cascade is a discordant symphony, my device, properly engineered, could be the note that silences it by creating counter-temporal buffers that dampens and disrupts its harmonic. Harmonic. Praxis scoffed, a discordant chime. You speak of harmony when your last creation brought only dissonance and death. I've had 15 years to reflect on that dissonance. Investigator, Zael said quietly. 15 years to understand the forces I trifled with. I was arrogant. I was wrong. But I also learned things no Valerian, with your careful, methodical approach, would ever dare to explore. The air crackled with tension. Praxis Viridian stared at him, her internal struggle almost palpable. Her logic, her entire societal conditioning, screamed against trusting this man, this architect of ruin. Yet, the ghost of a dying star system, Valerius Prime, loomed large. Your theory is radical, unsubstantiated by any accepted Valerian model, she finally said. Accepted models aren't stopping the cascade, Zael retorted. He was tired of apologies, tired of cowering. If they wanted his help, they had to accept all of him, failure and frail hope alike. Praxis was silent for a long moment. The only sounds were the distant hum of the station and the soft whirring of the guard's internal systems. The High Command has authorized me to extend to you a provisional research consultancy, under strict Valerian supervision. You will be given access to limited resources. You will attempt to prove the viability of this counter-resonance theory. Zael felt a surge, not of triumph, but of immense crushing weight. It wasn't forgiveness, it wasn't even trust. It was desperation, cloaked in Valerian formality. And if I refuse? He asked, though he knew he wouldn't. Praxis's gaze was unflinching. Then you remain here, Ryker, and Valerius Prime will face its fate. And your theories, like the starlight beacon, will become another forgotten echo in the void, she added, her voice dropping to a near whisper, heavy with implication. Should you fail, or should this prove to be another of your reckless endeavors leading to further disaster, the consequences for you will be absolute. Zael nodded slowly. The devil's bargain had been struck. He would trade his exile for a chance, however slim, to silence the ghosts. I understand the terms, Investigator Praxis. When do we begin? Praxis Viridian gestured to the guards. Now, you will accompany us to the cruiser Resolute Concord. Your new laboratory awaits. As he walked between the two towering Valerians, out of the dusty cargo bay and towards the waiting shuttle, Zael Ryker couldn't escape, the feeling that he was merely exchanging one prison for another. Far more dangerous one, but this one at least held the faintest glimmer of redemption. The interior of the Resolute Concorde was a testament to Valerian aesthetics and precision. Corridors glowed with soft, internally lit crystalline panels, their colors shifting in subtle gradients that Zael suspected were part of the ship's complex environmental and informational systems. The air was cool, pure, and carried a faint, almost imperceptible hum. The sound of perfectly calibrated technology, the very essence of harmonic resonance. It was a stark contrast to the chaotic grit of Terminus Station, and an even starker reminder of the ordered world he had once helped shatter. His laboratory was a converted auxiliary control room, small and Spartan. The Valerians had provided a high-resolution holographic interface, a fabricator unit capable of producing basic components, and access to their unclassified astrophysical databases. Classified information, Praxis Viridian had made explicitly clear, would be provided only on a need-to-know basis and under her direct supervision. He was, for all intents and purposes, a prisoner with a very specific, very demanding job. 2 guards, silent and imposing, were stationed outside his door at all times. Days blurred into a grueling cycle of theoretical modeling, simulation runs, and constant meticulous cross-checking by Valerian science teams via remote link. Praxis herself was a frequent, unnerving presence, her amethyst eyes scrutinizing his every calculation, her questions sharp and relentlessly logical. She missed nothing. "Your proposed energy matrix for the counter-resonance emitter," she chimed one cycle, her holographic projection hovering over his shoulder. "It shows a potential instability spike at the 7.3 terahertz frequency. This is uncomfortably close to the primary resonance of Valerian crystalline structures. Are you trying to find a new way to shatter us, Ryker?" Zael bit back a retort. Her suspicion was a constant, grating friction. "It's a theoretical harmonic. Investigator, a ghost in the machine. The actual dampening field I'm proposing operates on a different order of magnitude, phase-shifted to specifically interact with the CSC's temporal distortions, not solid matter. The simulations show?" "Simulations can be flawed," Praxis interjected, "as your work on the temporal anchor so devastatingly proved. The ghost of Starlight Beacon was never far." Zael forced himself to breathe, to maintain a semblance of calm. He remembered that day with a clarity that still twisted his gut. The thrill of anticipated breakthrough, the subtle warnings from junior technicians about pressure fluctuations in the anchor's core that he, in his hubris and under pressure from his own superiors for results, had dismissed. He recalled the sudden, sickening lurch as the spacetime around the beacon began to unravel, the screams over the comms, then the awful ringing silence. "The simulations for the anchor were incomplete," Zael admitted, his voice quiet but firm. "I made assumptions. I was overconfident. I am not making that mistake again. This time, every variable is being stress-tested to its absolute limit." He showed her a new set of equations, a modification he'd worked on through the last sleep cycle. "I've introduced a feedback loop, a self-correcting algorithm that actively monitors for and neutralizes those specific harmonic spikes. It learns, adapts. It's more organic than standard Valerian designs." Praxis studied the equations, her crystalline brow furrowed. The Valerians preferred predictive precision, systems that behaved exactly as designed, every time. Adaptive, algorithm self-learning systems. These were closer to the unpredictable nature of organics, something they generally viewed with caution. "This organic element," she said slowly, "it introduces unpredictability. How can you guarantee its stability?" "I can't, not with absolute certainty," Zael said honestly. "No one can when dealing with forces like the Cascade, but I can design it to fail safe, to dampen rather than amplify if it encounters unforeseen parameters. That's the lesson I learned from Starlight Beacon, the hardest lesson." His candor seemed to give Praxis pause. She didn't comment further on the adaptive algorithm that cycle, though her scrutiny remained intense. The Valerian technical teams assigned to assist him were polite, efficient, and utterly remote. They executed his fabrication request with flawless precision but offered no input, no collaboration. They were tools, not colleagues. Zael found himself missing the chaotic, argumentative brainstorming sessions he'd had with his human research team so long ago. That human spark, that willingness to throw out wild ideas to challenge and be challenged, it was absent here. One evening, after a particularly frustrating day of recalibrations, where a minor component, fabricated to his exact specifications, failed to perform due to an unforeseen interaction with the Valerian ship's unique energy signature, Zael almost gave in to despair. He slumped over his console, the weight of his task, of their suspicion pressing down on him. Praxis entered without announcing herself, a datapad in her hand. "The component failure," she said without preamble. "The Valerian energy systems generate a subtle chronoton field. Your shielding calculations for the component did not account for its decay products at that specific quantum level." Zael looked up, surprised. She wasn't accusing, she was offering data. Analysis. "I didn't have access to that level of detail on your ship's systems," he said, a touch defensively. "You do now," Praxis replied, transmitting the relevant schematics to his console. "Precision requires complete information. Your human tendency to estimate is a vulnerability." It was a criticism, yet it was also help. A very Valerian form of help couched in logic and a reminder of his perceived flaws, but help nonetheless. "Thank you, investigator," Zael said genuinely. Praxis merely inclined her head. "The Valerian High Command expects a viable prototype, designed within 10 cycles. The cascade shows no sign of abating." With that, she turned and left, leaving Zael to stare at the new data. It was a minuscule concession, a tiny crack in the wall of their distrust. But for Zael, working under the suffocating weight of his past and their present fear, it felt like a lifeline. He bent back to his work, the ghost of Starlight Beacon, whispering a little less loudly in the perfect humming silence of the Valerian cruiser. The devil's bargain was still in effect, but perhaps, just perhaps, the devil was beginning to see the value in his pitchfork. Within the allotted 10 cycles, Zael had a design. Not just a theory, but a tangible blueprint for a small-scale temporal resonance harmonizer. It was a compact spherical device, intricately webbed with conduits and focusing crystals, designed to project a localized inverted temporal field. Praxis and her science team subjected the design to days of rigorous non-stop simulations. To Zael's relief, and perhaps to their surprise, it held. The adaptive algorithm he'd incorporated seemed to be the key, smoothing out potential instabilities that their rigid models predicted. "The simulations are cautiously optimistic," Praxis conceded, her tone carefully neutral during a briefing with the ship's captain, a stern, ancient Valerian named Kalen. The device, theoretically, should be able to disrupt a low-intensity CSC fringe effect within a limited radius. Captain Kalen, whose crystalline structure was a deep, weathered amber, regarded Zael with unconcealed skepticism. Theoretically, Ryker's last device was also supposed to be stable. The Starlight Beacon paid the price for that theory. "This design incorporates safeguards born directly from that failure, Captain," Zael interjected, trying to keep his voice even. "It's designed to dampen, to de-escalate, not amplify." A test site was chosen. A desolate asteroid field on the edge of the Typhon Void, already partially consumed by the eerie, shimmering tendrils of the Chrono-Static Cascade. A probe sent ahead showed chronoton particle readings consistent with a low-level distortion, dangerous enough to test the harmonizer, but hopefully not so volatile as to cause an uncontrollable chain reaction. The resolute Concorde maintained a significant distance, while Zael, accompanied by Praxis and a heavily armed 2 Valerian technical team, took a specialized Valerian work pod, the Shaper's Anvil, towards the designated test zone. The prototype harmonizer, no larger than a standard atmospheric drone, was mounted on an external deployment rig. Zael felt a prickle of sweat on his palms, a sensation he hadn't experienced in years. This wasn't just about saving Valerius Prime anymore. It was about proving, if only to himself, that he wasn't just an agent of destruction. "We are approaching the target coordinates," Praxis announced, her voice calm, but her normally vibrant amethyst skin seemed a shade paler. "The CSC field is unsettling. Sensors are reporting temporal fluctuations of ±3 standard seconds even at this range." Through the work pod's main view screen, the asteroid field looked like a frozen explosion. Some asteroids were blurred as if caught between moments. Others glittered with an unnatural fractured light. Wisps of the CSC, like iridescent time-bending fog, coiled around them. "Deploying the harmonizer," Zael said, his fingers moving across the control interface he'd helped design. The device detached from the Shaper's anvil and drifted slowly towards the densest part of the visible distortion. "Initiating activation sequence," Zael continued, his gaze flicking between the device's telemetry and the view screen. "Power, levels nominal, field emitters charging." For a moment nothing happened. Then a soft blue glow emanated from the harmonizer, spreading outwards. Zael held his breath. The telemetry indicated the inverted temporal field was forming, struggling. "Against the ambient chaos of the cascade, we have resonance," a Valerian technician, Unit Sigma 4, reported, his voice tight. "The CSC field it's reacting." The blue glow intensified, and where it met the shimmering tendrils of the cascade, a violent, strobing light erupted. The asteroid field seemed to convulse. Instead of dampening, the CSC effect in the immediate vicinity of the harmonizer suddenly flared, expanding rapidly. Alarms blared within the Shaper's anvil. "Ryker, what's happening?" Praxis demanded, her hand instinctively going to the controls, ready to override. It's an unexpected harmonic amplification," Zael stammered, his mind racing. The adaptive algorithm should have caught this. The cascade's base frequency in this sector must be subtly different than the probe data suggested. It's creating a feedback loop with the initial emitter pulse. The work pod was buffeted by a wave of temporal distortion. Zael saw one of the Valerian technicians, Unit Tau 9, flicker, his arm momentarily desynchronizing, appearing elongated and transparent before snapping back. Fear, cold and sharp, pierced Zael. This was Starlight Beacon all over again. "Shut it down," Praxis ordered, her voice cutting through the alarms. "No, wait," Zael yelled, pushing her hand away from the master abort. "If we just cut power, the collapsing field could create an even worse backlash. I need to shift the phase of the emitter array manually, bypass the algorithm's current learning curve." It was a desperate gamble. The system was designed for automated adjustment. A manual override, especially under this kind of temporal stress, was incredibly risky. He'd be flying blind, relying on instinct and his raw, painful understanding of how these energies misbehaved. "That's against every Valerian safety protocol," Praxis protested, but there was a flicker of uncertainty in her eyes. She had seen Tau 9's arm. She knew their standard procedures were failing. "Our protocols are being shredded out there," Zael countered, his fingers already flying across a secondary console, inputting commands that made the Valerian technicians gasp. "Trust me on this, Praxis. Just for a few seconds." He didn't wait for her assent. He rerouted power, tweaked emitter timings, fighting the ship's bucking and the disorienting visual static that was starting to bleed onto the screens. For a horrifying instant, the harmonizer glowed an angry red, and the CSC field pulsed, swelling like a monstrous blister. This was it, the point of no return. Then, with a suddenness that was almost as shocking as the flare-up, the red faded. The blue light from the harmonizer stabilized, pulsed once, twice, and then began to visibly push back against the cascade's shimmering tendrils. The strobing lessened. The violent temporal fluctuations reported by the sensors began to subside, within a small but distinct bubble around the device. An asteroid that had been flickering in and out of existence nearby solidified its light steady. It's working," Unit Sigma 4 whispered, his voice filled with disbelief. "The CSC field is being dampened. Localized temporal stability is increasing." Zael sagged back in his chair, his body trembling with adrenaline and relief. He'd stared into the abyss of his past failure and this time hadn't fallen. Praxis Viridian slowly lowered her hand from the abort controls. She looked at Zael, not with accusation, but with a complex, unreadable expression. The immediate danger had passed, but the incident had been a hair's breadth from catastrophe. "Your instincts, Ryker," she said, her voice still tight, "are as dangerous as your theories. You bypassed safety interlocks, ignored established parameters. And it worked." Zael finished, meeting her gaze. The algorithm was too slow. It needed a human kick in the metaphorical pants. He knew he sounded flippant, but the near disaster had shaken him badly. The test was a partial success, but a terrifyingly flawed one. He had proven the core concept of the temporal resonance harmonizer had merit, but he'd also demonstrated just how volatile these energies were, how close to the edge he was operating. Trust, which had been a fragile seedling, was now battered. Yet amidst the recriminations he knew were coming, there was also a grudging acknowledgement in Praxis's eyes. He had faced down the chaos, not with perfect Valerian logic, but with something else, something messy, intuitive, and uniquely human. The Valerian High Command would be briefed, decisions would be made. But as the Shaper's anvil retreated from the now slightly calmer asteroid field, leaving the small harmonizer steadily glowing its defiance, Zael knew one thing. The path to redemption was going to be far more perilous than he had ever imagined. The cascade was still out there, and his solution was a double-edged sword, capable of salvation or a far greater damnation. The aftermath of the test was a storm of Valerian deliberation. Zael was confined to his quarters aboard the Resolute Concord while Praxis Viridian presented her report to the Valerian High Command. He could only imagine the arguments, his recklessness versus the undeniable, albeit localized, success. The data from the harmonizer, still active in the asteroid field, showed a consistent, stable bubble of normal spacetime. It was a tiny victory, but against a foe like the Chrono-Static Cascade, even tiny victories were precious. Days later, Praxis returned. Her expression was one of weary resolve. "The High Command has considered your unorthodox methods," she began, her voice devoid of its usual crispness. "The CSC has breached the outer markers of the Valeria system. Our primary defense fleets have suffered significant temporal disarray. We are out of conventional options." Zael waited, his heart a slow, heavy beat. "They have authorized a full-scale deployment," Praxis continued, "a larger, more powerful version of your temporal resonance harmonizer. The objective, to create a counter-resonance wave capable of neutralizing the Cascade's advance on Valerius Prime." She paused, then added the part Zael had been dreading and expecting. "Given the unpredictable nature of your technology and its apparent symbiosis with your equally unpredictable insights, they have determined that a Valerian vessel is unsuitable for this task. They want me to use my own ship," Zael stated. It wasn't a question. The Misfit's Chance, his salvaged, patched-up research vessel, was little more than a husk compared to Valerian cruisers. But it was his. He knew its quirks, its limitations, its surprising resilience. "Precisely," Praxis confirmed. "The Misfit's Chance is currently docked at a secure Valerian orbital facility. It is being refitted with the necessary power conduits and a fabrication bay for the construction of the full-scale harmonizer, under your direct supervision. We have also taken the liberty of upgrading its sensor arrays and shield emitters." A ghost of a wry smile touched her crystalline lips. "It seems even Valerian desperation has its limits when it comes to entrusting survival to substandard human engineering." Zael almost smiled back. "Generous. And the catch?" "The target is the Typhon Void," Praxis said, her voice sobering. "We believe the CSC originates from a singularity, or a series of interacting singularities, deep within the void. Deploying the harmonizer at its source offers the greatest chance of creating a cascade failure within the cascade itself, effectively unraveling it, the Typhon Void. Even seasoned human pilots avoided it. A graveyard of ships, a place where spacetime was notoriously unstable even before the CSC. To take the Misfit's Chance, a ship that was already a collection of compromises and luck, into its depths was near suicidal. And you'll be overseeing this gambit?" Zael asked, looking directly at Praxis. I will be accompanying you, she stated, along with a select team of Valerian technical specialists. Unit Sigma 4 and Unit Tau 9 from the initial test have volunteered. They believe that your methods warrant further observation. Her gaze was steady. And frankly, Ryker, after the stunt you pulled with the manual override, the High Command feels you require a Valerian hand on the emergency brake, so to speak. My hand. There was a subtle shift in her tone, something beyond mere duty. A grudging respect, or perhaps just a scientist's curiosity, overriding her innate caution. Zael suspected it was a complex cocktail of both. The next few weeks were a blur of intense activity. Zael found himself back aboard the Misfit's Chance, a vessel that felt more like home than any place he'd been in 15 years. The Valerian upgrades were impressive, seamlessly integrated. The new fabrication bay churned out components for the scaled-up harmonizer, a sphere now easily 10 meters in diameter, its crystalline conduits pulsing with barely contained power. He worked alongside the Valerian technicians, Sigma 4 and Tau 9. Their initial stiffness had thawed slightly after the asteroid field test. They still followed Valerian protocol to the letter, but they listened to Zael's explanations, asked insightful questions. There was no camaraderie, not yet, but there was a budding functional cooperation. Praxis was a constant presence, observing, analyzing, questioning. She pushed Zael on his theoretical limits, forcing him to articulate the intuitive leaps his mind made. Sometimes Zael felt like a particularly erratic lab specimen under her microscope. Yet, during one late-night session, when Zael was struggling with a complex energy flow simulation for the harmonizer's core, Praxis quietly pointed out a Valerian theorem on harmonic dampening that, when adapted, unlocked the problem. It was a subtle gesture of collaboration. The day of departure arrived under a cloud of grim determination. Valerius Prime was now experiencing significant temporal distortions in its outer system. Time was running out. The Misfit's Chance, its old hull gleaming with new Valerian sensor pods and its cargo bay cradling the massive harmonizer, detached from the orbital facility. The Resolute Concord and a small flotilla of Valerian warships would escort them to the edge of the Typhon Void, but from there, they would be on their own. As the familiar constellations of the Orion Spur receded, Zael stood on the small bridge of his ship, Praxis beside him. Your vessel's name, Praxis commented, her gaze on the star-dusted void. The Misfit's Chance, is that how you see this mission, Ryker? A desperate throw of the dice by an outcast? Zael looked at the Valerian, her crystalline skin catching the faint light from the nebula ahead. Maybe. Or maybe it's about proving that even misfits, even failures can find a purpose when everything else has fallen apart. He paused. This ship, it's seen better days. So have I. But it's never let me down when it mattered. Praxis was silent for a moment. The Valerian concept of redemption is complex, Ryker. It is not simply about atonement. It is about restoring balance, about rectifying dissonance. If your harmonizer succeeds, it will be more than a technical achievement. I know what's at stake, Praxis, Zael said softly. For Valerius Prime. And for me. The Typhon Void loomed ahead, a swirling vortex of dark nebulae and fractured light like a wound in the fabric of space. The Misfit's Chance, dwarfed by its Valerian escorts, plunged towards it, carrying the hopes of a desperate species and the last, most audacious gamble of a disgraced human scientist. The Typhon gambit had begun. The Typhon Void was worse than the legends. As the Misfit's Chance crossed the threshold, leaving its Valerian escorts behind, spacetime itself seemed to groan. The ship's internal chronometers flickered erratically, sometimes jumping seconds, sometimes lagging. Visual distortions played across the viewports, making stars shimmer and warp like reflections in disturbed water. The very air in the recycled atmosphere felt thick, charged with an unseen, unstable energy. Temporal shear is increasing, Unit Sigma 4 reported from his station, his voice tight but controlled. We're experiencing micro-fluctuations across the hull. It's like sailing through chop, but the waves are made of time. Zael gripped the pilot's yoke, his knuckles white. His old ship protested with groans and shudders, but the Valerian upgraded, shields held, deflecting the worst of the ambient distortions. Praxis stood beside him, her amethyst form rigid, monitoring the complex sensor readings that painted a terrifying picture of the environment. The origin point of the CSC is approximately 2 million kilometers ahead, she announced. The energy signature is an overwhelming. It's not a single singularity, Ryker. It appears to be a nexus of interacting temporal anomalies, a chaotic resonance chamber. That complicates things, Zael muttered, navigating around a particularly violent ripple in spacetime that sent a shudder through the deck plates. The harmonizer was designed for a more coherent source. You will adapt, Ryker, Praxis stated, not as a question, but as an expectation. It was a startling display of something that almost resembled confidence. Your organic algorithms were designed for unpredictability, were they not? Hours crawled by, each one an ordeal. The Valerian technicians, Sigma 4 and Tau 9, worked tirelessly, recalibrating sensors, reinforcing shield harmonics, their precise movements a counterpoint to the chaos outside. Zael, drawing on every bit of his piloting skill and his intuitive feel for temporal mechanics, guided the Misfit's chance deeper into the void. Finally, they reached the designated deployment zone. Before them, the source of the Chrono-Static Cascade pulsed like a malevolent, multifaceted eye. It was a maelstrom of fractured light and shadow, tendrils of distorted time lashing out into the void. The sheer wrongness of it was a physical weight. "This is it," Zael said, his voice hoarse. "Prepare to deploy the temporal resonance harmonizer." In the cargo bay, the massive sphere hummed with power, its crystalline conduits glowing, an intense, steady blue. On Zael's command, the deployment sequence began. The bay doors groaned open, exposing the harmonizer to the raw fury of the Typhon Void. Slowly, majestically, it was nudged out into the abyss. Harmonizer deployed, Tau 9 confirmed. All systems nominal, initiating field generation. Zael watched the main view screen, his heart pounding. The blue glow of the harmonizer intensified, pushing against the chaotic energies of the CSC nexus. For a breathless moment, there was a standoff, the steady, ordered resonance of Zael's creation against the wild, destructive symphony of the Cascade. Then, the Cascade reacted. It wasn't a gradual pushback. It was a violent, instantaneous surge. The nexus pulsed, and a wave of pure temporal chaos, far more intense than anything they had yet encountered, slammed into the harmonizer and the Misfit's chance. Alarms shrieked across the bridge. Lights flickered and died, plunging them into emergency reds. The ship bucked like a wild animal. "Shields at 30%, Sigma 4 yelled over the din. "Hull breaches on decks 4 and 5, we're losing attitude control." The harmonizer caught in the focused blast, flared an angry, critical red. Its steady blue glow was overwhelmed, consumed. "Ryker!" Praxis cried, grabbing a handhold. As the deck tilted violently, "The harmonizer, it's overloading, it's going to replicate the Starlight Beacon disaster." Zael stared at the telemetry, his mind a maelstrom. The adaptive algorithm was failing, overwhelmed by the sheer complexity and power of the CSC nexus. The energy readings from the harmonizer were spiking off the scale, mirroring the catastrophic cascade failure of his first experiment, but magnified 1,000-fold. His greatest fear was materializing before his eyes. "It's not just countering. The harmonics," Zael realized with dawning horror, his voice barely a whisper. "The nexus. It's feeding off the harmonizer's energy, amplifying its own chaotic resonance. It's treating my device like a tuning fork for its own destructive song." This wasn't a purely mechanical or mathematical problem anymore. The CSC at its source felt almost alive. It was learning, adapting, turning his own weapon against them. "We have to jettison the harmonizer," Praxis shouted, her Valerian composure cracking under the immense strain. "Abandon the mission. It's our only—" "No!" Zael roared, a desperate certainty cutting through his fear. He looked at the wildly fluctuating energy patterns, the swirling chaos of the nexus, There was a pattern there, hidden within the madness, something his equations hadn't fully grasped. It wasn't just about counter-resonance. It was about dissonance, then finding a new, unexpected harmony. A purely logical counter isn't enough. It needs a human touch, an illogical leap. He lurched from the pilot's seat towards the primary engineering console, which thankfully still had power. I have to manually retune the core resonator, introduce a controlled disharmony, something the Nexus won't expect, to break its feedback loop. That's insane, Ryker. Sigma 4 protested, his crystalline face etched with fear. You'll tear it apart, and us with it. It's our only shot, Zael yelled back, his fingers flying over the controls, bypassing safety interlocks, overriding the struggling adaptive algorithm. He was pouring his own intuition, his very essence, into the machine. He had to expose himself metaphorically and perhaps literally to the core of the problem. A searing pain shot up his arm as a feedback pulse from the console jolted him. The lights on the bridge flickered violently, and through a momentary stabilization of the viewport he saw the harmonizer glowing like a miniature unstable sun. Praxis was beside him, her face grim. What are you doing? The Valerian crystalline structure. It can withstand certain temporal stresses better than organics, can't it? Zael gasped, fighting the pain and the disorienting temporal flux. There's a manual dampening conduit on the harmonizer's outer casing. If I can isolate the feedback point, you might be able to physically realign it. Just a few degrees, it needs a physical shock to break the resonance lock. It was a wild, desperate plea. He was asking her to directly expose herself to the failing device, to trust his madness. Praxis stared at him, then at the raging chaos on the view screen, at her flickering, terrified technicians. Her entire being was a construct of logic and order. This was anathema. But she also saw the utter conviction in Zael's eyes, the same desperate focus she'd seen during the asteroid test, magnified. Protocol dictated retreat, self-preservation, but Valerius Prime was dying. Guide me, Praxis Viridian said, her voice a low, determined chime that cut through the alarms. Tell me what to do, Ryker. In that moment, the last wall of distrust between them crumbled, consumed by the fires of imminent destruction. Zael, gritting his teeth against the pain, guided her through the interface that controlled the harmonizer's remote manipulator arms, still barely functional. It was a clumsy, brutal form of surgery on a device threatening to detonate with the force of a star. He directed the arm while Praxis, her own crystalline body resonating sympathetically with the harmonizer's distress, fine-tuned its movements, her touch surprisingly steady. Now Praxis, nudge the primary crystal array, 3 degrees. Counterclockwise, Zael yelled, as another energy wave rocked the ship. With a silent nod through the remote interface, Praxis gave the command. On the view screen, the manipulator arm made the tiny, crucial adjustment to the colossal, failing sphere. For one eternal second, nothing changed. The harmonizer still blazed red, the alarm still screamed. Zael's heart sank. Failure. Again. Then the red light on the harmonizer flickered. Once. Twice. It shifted, not to blue, but to a brilliant, pure white. The chaotic energies of the CSC nexus seemed to recoil, to stutter. The violent shuddering of the Misfit's chance lessened. What is happening? Tau 9 whispered. The white light from the harmonizer pulsed outwards, not as a wave of force, but as a wave of calm. Where it touched the tendrils of the CSC, they didn't just dissipate. They unraveled, their temporal distortion smoothing out, their angry light fading into the black of normal space. The harmonizer wasn't just fighting the cascade anymore, it was soothing it, detuning its destructive resonance, introducing a new, stable harmony into the heart of the chaos. Zael sagged against the console, a wave of exhaustion washing over him so profound it was almost euphoric. It's working. Praxis stared at the view screen, at the harmonizer now pulsing with a serene, powerful white light, steadily calming the raging heart of the Typhon Void. Her normally perfect Valerian composure was gone, replaced by an expression of utter, unadulterated awe. She looked at Zael, No longer the pariah, the reckless human, but the architect of an impossible salvation. "Ryker," she breathed. "You did it." The cascade point had been reached, and somehow, together, they had tipped the balance. Thorough, white light of the temporal resonance harmonizer pulsed rhythmically, a serene heartbeat in the chaotic depths of the Typhon Void. Slowly, miraculously, the raging energies of the Chrono-Static Cascade began to recede. The angry, fractured light of the nexus softened, its violent tendrils retracting, then dissolving like smoke in a gentle breeze. The effect wasn't an explosion or a sudden negation, but a graceful unwinding, a calming of a cosmic storm. On the battered bridge of the Misfit's chants, silence descended, broken only by the soft hum of emergency power and the ragged breathing of its occupants. The violent shudders ceased, the disorienting temporal flickers vanished. The ship floated in a pocket of serene, stable spacetime, the harmonizer a brilliant white star nearby. "Status report," Zael managed, his voice raspy. Unit Sigma 4, after a moment of stunned silence, tapped at his console. "The CSC energy, signature from the Nexus. It's collapsing. Rapidly. The wave front propagating towards Valerius Prime. It's fragmenting. Dissipating. Local spacetime within this sector is stabilizing to nominal parameters." He looked up, his crystalline eyes wide. "It appears the cascade has been neutralized." A wave of relief so potent it was physically weakening washed over Zael. He slumped further against his console, a trembling exhaustion gripping his limbs. The pain in his arm where the feedback pulse had struck him was a dull throb, a reminder of how close they had come. Praxis Viridian moved to his side. She placed a cool, crystalline hand gently on his shoulder, a gesture so un-Valerian, so unexpectedly warm it startled him. "You are injured, Ryker." "Just a souvenir," Zael mumbled, managing a weak smile. "Better than the alternative." Tau 9. His composure regained, was already hailing the Valerian fleet waiting at the edge of the Typhon Void. His voice, usually clipped and formal, now held an uncharacteristic note of triumph. "Resolute conquered. This is Misfit's chance. The harmonizer, it was successful. The Chrono-Static Cascade is dissipating. Repeat, the cascade is dissipating." The response from Captain Kalen was initially stunned silence, then a flood of relieved, almost incoherent Valerian chatter before his disciplined training reasserted itself. Assistance was en route. As they waited, Zael watched the harmonizer. It had become more than a machine. It was a testament, to failure redeemed, to intuition embraced, to a partnership forged in the heart of chaos. The Valerians had provided the precision, the resources, the unyielding framework. He had provided the spark of unconventional insight, the willingness to dance on the precipice of disaster to find a solution. When the Valerian rescue ships arrived, they found the Misfit's chance battered but whole, its crew exhausted but alive in the Typhon Void, once a symbol of untamable chaos, now strangely calm. Zael was taken aboard the Resolute Concorde, his arm treated by Valerian medics with surprising gentleness. Praxis stayed with him. Later in the captain's briefing room, before a holographic assembly of the Valerian High Command, Praxis Viridian delivered her final report. She detailed the mission, the terrifying climax, and Zael's unorthodox, life-saving intervention. Therefore, Praxis concluded, her resonant voice filling the chamber, her gaze sweeping across the assembled Valerian leaders. "It is the formal assessment of this investigator that Zael Ryker's methods, while unconventional and carrying significant risk, were uniquely suited to the unprecedented nature of the Chrono-Static Cascade. His actions, and the technology born from his understanding, were directly responsible for the salvation of Valerius Prime and countless lives across the Orion Spur. The Starlight Beacon disaster remains a tragic chapter. However, his subsequent contributions have fundamentally altered that narrative." There was a long silence from the High Command. Zael, listening from a medical bay link, felt a lifetime of guilt begin to lift, not vanish, but become a weight he could finally bear without being crushed. Then, the eldest of the High Command, a Valerian whose crystalline structure seemed to contain the wisdom of ages, spoke. Zael Ryker, your past actions brought great sorrow to the Valerian people. Your recent actions have brought profound deliverance. The universe rarely offers such stark dichotomies or such clear opportunities for recalibration. The Valerian word was precise yet held a universe of meaning. The Valerian people acknowledge your service. You are no longer considered a pariah. It wasn't effusive praise. It wasn't forgiveness in the human sense. But it was acceptance. It was the restoration of balance the Valerian way, and for Zael, it was more than enough. Weeks later, the Misfit's chance, largely repaired with Valerian assistance, floated in orbit around a recovering Valerius Prime. The planet below, once threatened with temporal oblivion, now shimmered with renewed vitality. The harmonizer remained in the Typhon Void, a silent, glowing sentinel, its white light a beacon of a new kind of resonance. Zael stood on his bridge, looking out at the stars. Praxis Viridian entered, carrying 2 Valerian nutrient bulbs. She offered him one. The High Command has offered you a permanent research position at the Valerian Institute of Temporal Mechanics, she said, her tone neutral, but with an undercurrent Zael could now decipher as Valerian approval. Full access, no restrictions. Zael took a sip from the bulb. It tasted clean, new. Thank you, Praxis. But I think my work here is done. There are other voids out there, other dissonances. He smiled, a genuine, unburdened smile. Besides, I don't think I'm cut out for the quiet life. Praxis nodded slowly. Perhaps you are not. Some harmonies, it seems, are born from controlled chaos. She looked out at the stars with him. The human capacity for learning from profound failure, for finding unorthodox solutions under extreme pressure. It is a trait the Valerians are only now beginning to appreciate. We all have our strengths, investigator, Zael said. Sometimes it just takes a universe-threatening catastrophe to help us see them in each other. Praxis almost smiled. Indeed, Ryker. Indeed. He wasn't the butcher of starlight, beacon anymore. He was Zael Ryker, the man who tamed the cascade, the human who had, against all odds, found his own redemptive resonance. His past was not erased, but its echoes no longer defined him. As the Misfit's chance prepared for its next journey, Zael knew that whatever lay ahead he would face it not as a ghost of his failures, but as a testament to the enduring, often messy but ultimately hopeful spirit of humanity, and the unexpected, harmonies that could be found even in the deepest voids.